Good afternoon. My name is Bill Herbert. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education. We're very thrilled today to have a set of panels at Roosevelt House, which is the former home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. As you may have heard yesterday from the Director of Roosevelt House, Harold Holzer, these buildings were originally mansions built by the Roosevelts and lived there to 1941. It was their New York City home. For labor history buffs and people who care about history generally, Roosevelt House has a particular history involving the inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt. Prior to his inauguration, he met with people who would be in his administration. Among them was Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was being considered to be the first female Secretary of Labor, and she had worked with Roosevelt in New York for many, many years. And as you may remember, or you may know, that this past week was a commemoration of the Triangle Factory Fire, which precipitated a tremendous amount of social change, legislation, and change in New York. And Frances Perkins was very much a part of that whole movement of labor law reform in New York. So anyway, in 1933, she came to meet with Roosevelt, and she knew he was going to nominate. He knew he was going to offer her the Secretary of Labor position, and she came prepared. She came prepared with demands or conditions for her accepting the nomination. And among her demands was unemployment insurance, an end to child labor, federal wage and hour rules, and what became Social Security. So when we had a panel being worked on to develop regarding retirement equity, I couldn't think of a better place to place it among all the various locations and venues we have for this conference than at Roosevelt House. So we thank you for coming. The panel today is going to be moderated by Ann Olin. She's the Managing Director of the TIA Institute, and I'd like to turn it over to Ann.
Thank you. My first job as moderator is to introduce my panelists. We actually have 3 panelists today. 2 are here. The third had a conflict, but she sent her comments recorded, so we'll play that midway through. So to my immediate left is Brent Davis. He's an economist at the TIAA Institute, so Brent and I work together, although he's out of Charlotte and I work here in New York. Brent's research interests include behavioral economics, behavioral finance, and household financial security. Before joining the Institute, he spent several years as a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer in the Department of Public Finance at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. That's always a fun fact that we get to throw in our introductions. Brent has taught a variety of courses and published several papers in behavioral economics. He is a member of the American Economic Association, the American Risk and Insurance Association, and the National Tax Association. John Dorsa is the Chief Pension Officer for the Bureau of Asset Management, BAM, New York City Office of the Comptroller. In this role, he serves as the Comptroller's designee to the 5 New York City retirement systems: the Teachers' Retirement System, the Employees' Retirement System, the New York City Police Pension Fund, the New York City Fire Department Pension Fund, and the Board of Education Retirement System, as well as the respective variable supplement funds and the New York City Deferred Compensation Plan. That's a lot of things to remember, John. In his capacity as trustee, John has served on several of the system's subcommittees, including as chair of the NYSERS Audit Committee. With over a decade of service as a trustee and over 20 years with the Comptroller's Office, John is one of the city's most experienced pension professionals. That's not a nice way of saying old, but experienced pension professionals. John joined the Comptroller's Office after starting his career in financial services, working for MetLife and later a small boutique investment firm. John began his tenure in BAM as an investment analyst, ultimately serving as senior investment officer for non-U.S. equity until his appointment as one of the Comptroller's designees. Since his appointment to the boards, John has served as associate director, director, and executive director for pensions prior to his appointment as chief pension officer. John earned his bachelor's in political science and history from Salve Regina in Rhode Island, Newport. a Master's of Public Administration with distinction from Long Island University, and a Master's in Labor Relations from Cornell. John also attained a certificate in sustainable investing from the RFK Compass program through Columbia University. And just again, my name is Ann Olin. I've been at TIAA for more than 35 years and with the TIAA Institute, which is a think tank within the company since it was started 25 years ago. So that takes care of our introductions. I'm going to start by saying once upon a time, there was a man named Andrew Carnegie. He was extremely wealthy from the expanding American steel industry and a leading philanthropist. In 1918, he started the Teachers Insurance and Annuity Association, known as TIAA, because he was horrified at the thought that professors, individuals who dedicated their lives to teaching and shaping young lives, might retire into poverty. So he started TIAA, a pension fund, which I hope all of you are familiar with. Remind you that this was 17 years before the passage of Social Security, before the passage of the Social Security Act. And TIAA was founded to help ensure that professors would have reliable income in retirement. And we've maintained that mission ever since. We are a leading provider of secure retirements, primarily for employees in the higher ed sector and broader charitable sector. But under the leadership of our current CEO, Tashunda Brown Duckett, TIAA is increasingly intent on helping to ensure that all Americans retire with dignity, not just educators, but really all of our society. Today, we have $1.2 trillion in assets under management, and in 2021 alone, we paid more than $6.4 billion in lifetime income to retired TIAA participants. As I mentioned, the Institute is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. We're a think tank within TIAA. We conduct and support cutting-edge research in the areas of financial literacy, longevity literacy, which is a phrase we've coined recently this year, lifetime income, retirement plan design, and behavioral finance in the context of retirement. We do some of our research by partnering with leading academic centers, such as the Pension Research Council at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, and the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center at George Washington University, and the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining, right here at Hunter. And we work closely with top-notch researchers through our Fellows Program, a network of more than 60 scholars, faculty from colleges and universities across the country who work with us not only on research, but they serve as judges for our annual Samuelson Award, which recognizes outstanding published research. All that to say that we appreciate this opportunity to build and share knowledge on our favorite subject, at least I think I can speak for all of us, retirement. Last year, TIAA launched a campaign that we call Retire Inequality, which a clever play on words. Retire is our bread and butter, but it also means put an end to. And here we are, trying to retire inequality. The first wave of TIAA's campaign, these campaigns include communications, op-eds, research, convenings, and more, focused on the gender retirement equity gap and centers on the key data point of 30%, that women have 30% less income in retirement than men. And in fact, if you look at the back of your program, TIAA has an ad there that features that 30% data point. There are many contributing factors to that gender retirement income gap, some that might be addressed with simple workplace and legislative policy changes, and others that are significantly more complex and harder to solve for. Brent will dig into some of that during his remarks. Just FYI, the second wave of our campaign, which is currently underway, centers on a key data point of 54%. That 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire at the normal retirement age without a drop to their standard of living. And this one last data point, 40% of Americans don't have enough to retire. So there's quite a crisis. That may be a bit of an exaggeration in some people's minds, but I think it's significant enough to devote at least this session to. We'll dig into those other waves in future conferences. After Brent speaks, Valerie Martin Conley, we'll hear from her through a recording. She's one of the Institute Fellows that I referenced. She'll speak to us more specifically about structural reasons that may be contributing to the gender retirement income gap in higher education. And John then will be our third speaker and will pull us back out for a broader view and share a government perspective on what we've been seeing over the past few years in the retirement and pension plan arena. Each speaker will take about 15 minutes. I'll check in then with all of you if you have questions or comments, and if you don't, I will then pose a few questions to our speakers. Sounds good? All right, so with that, Brent, over to you. You have your clicker, and his slides should be, and they are. Thank you.
All right, so Ann mentioned the 30% difference in retirement income between men and women. I'm going to be diving into that with some stats, primarily among our TIAA participants, which covers about 3 million people in the U.S., primarily in higher education, hospitals, museums, and other nonprofit sectors. I'm going to some data on retirement lengths, retirement income, Social Security, differences in retirement savings, and finally look at relative replacement weight. So how much income are people replacing in retirement compared to what they earned right before they retired? So retirement length. So one of the big things for women is that women have longer retirements than men. That means they need to finance consumption over a longer period of time when working fewer years. So among our own participants, women retire on average about 1.3, 1.5 years earlier than men. This is even lower if you look at the at-large population. The median woman retires at age 62 compared to 65 for a man. So not only do they retire earlier on the front end, but they can expect to live a lot longer. So I think here a current 66-year-old in average health who doesn't smoke, woman has significantly higher chance of living to 90 compared to a man. So you can think about the problem of having to finance retirement for 30 years, right? That's a substantially longer time, than 5 decades ago, right, when the center was founded. Okay, so I'm going to start with the income gap, and that has important implications when we talk about retirement income gap. And so for the income gap, the average, depending on the year, is that women earn about 80 to 83 cents per dollar of a man. And you can see the chart up here broken down by race. And it's even a little more for blacks and Hispanics because of the lower aggregate numbers, right? So the connection to lower incomes to lower retirement incomes is one, Social Security, which is the primary source for most Americans when they're covered by Social Security. Although in the higher ed sector, not everybody is covered by Social Security, so that's an important caveat. And the Social Security benefit formula depends on, one, when you claim benefits. I'm going to get into that in another slide or two. But two, how much you work over your lifetime. So if women earn less over their careers, they're going to have less Social Security income in retirement, the way the formula works. Connecting this to defined contribution pensions, where you accumulate assets and then you have to draw them out, as opposed to defined benefit pension, where you put in money and then the pension pays you monthly income for life, usually, is that savings, usually from the employer as part of your work, is usually set on a % of your salary. So if your salary is lower and the employer puts 5% into your retirement savings, if you're earning $100,000, you're going to get more money than someone earning $50,000. So that's another driver from income to retirement savings. All right, turning back to Social Security claiming. You can claim Social Security as soon as age 62, but if you wait until age 70, you'll get about 50% more income for life. And women, even though they retire earlier, have longer retirement lengths, are 6 percentage points more likely to retire before they get to the normal retirement age of 65. So that means when they take Social Security benefits earlier, they're going to get lower monthly payments compared to the average man. All right. So they earn less, they claim earlier. So how much does this differ in when we look at median Social Security amounts? So for the man, average Social Security amount, or I think the median, is $1,800 in 2020. For a woman, this is only about $1,400. That's 34% less. The good news is that gap is shrinking over the past 10 years, but it's still a significant gap. Another issue with this gap is Social Security provides cost of living increases. I think this year was a record 8% increase for Social Security income recipients. And if you're at a lower Social Security amount, you don't benefit as much on an absolute dollar basis from that 8% cost of living increase, right? 8% increase on $1,000 is going to be less than an 8% increase on $2,000. So that's going to be another driver of the retirement income gap as you get further and further into retirement. So moving on from Social Security to retirement savings, which is Americans' largest store of wealth outside of their primary residence. Well, before I get there, I forgot I had a slide on longevity insurance. So we see that women earn less in Social Security than men, and they expect to finance a lot longer in retirement. So we might expect that women have a more demand for a lifetime income because they have this greater longevity risk. They have more years to finance consumption in retirement. They have more years at which they might run out of their income. But we find that women actually take fewer life annuities than men. So that's kind of one thing where financial education, guidance, and advice could help women ensuring that they're protected against living a long time in retirement. All right, now moving on to retirement savings. So we talked about lower salaries and a teaser on kind of the defined contribution pension structure. So it's no surprise that we see the median contribution dollars to the retirement plan TIA is about $1,300 less for women in the small dark blue bubble compared to men in 2020. All right, so that's a lot, especially when you consider that this happens every year and it compounds with investment returns. That's only on the aggregate amount. So we might think, well, are women saving the same percent of their salary as men? And actually we find out that they're saving about 10% less when you adjust for salary. So this means that women have additional savings pressures beyond lower salary. It could be childcare, elder care, other situations like that. So salaries aren't the only driver for lower contributions. There's some other additional factors as well. So all this leads to a huge difference in accumulated assets at retirement. So in defined contribution plan, you got to accumulate assets, and then you need to generate income from those assets because you don't have a defined benefit plan. And you look at age 65, the median balance for a man is more than double that for a woman. So all these little changes, even though say it's only $1,300 of difference in savings per year, over a 40-45 career, these differences really add up, right? You can look from under age 50, oops. Oh. No one yelled at me, the slide didn't move. So here, look at this bottom one. At age 55, the median participant in our retirement system, the man has about $500,000, the woman only has $200,000. And look how much that difference has grown compared for those who are under 50. So all these little differences I talked about, saving $1,300 more per year for a man, doesn't sound like that much, but over 40, 45 years, it really adds up. And when you think about the level of income you can generate from $200,000 is going to be very minimal, especially when you have to do it for 25 years compared to maybe 20 or 21 for a man. All right. So all these we're talking about kind of retirement income difference as an absolute basis. You know, woman gets $2,000 a month, the man gets $2,800 a month. But let's talk about this on a relative amount because that's another measure, right? So you can, if you say, well, a man earns $80,000 right before retirement, how much of that income is he replacing after retirement? 50%, 100%? And we can look at the same for women. So we can look at this in relative terms as well. Are they on track to replace the same percentage of their pre-retirement income? All right. So we can do this using the asset salary ratio. So hopefully you can bear with me while I walk you through this, One way we can do this is say, okay, we expect you to retire at 65, 67, whatever. We have some assumptions of salary growth. You take a life annuity retirement. How much assets do you need today to replace a certain amount of income in retirement? Let's call it 40%. Why 40%? Well, if you add 40% to Social Security, you replace between 70 to 80% of your income, which is what most financial advisors tend to recommend. So you take your assets at your current age, divide it by your salary, and that's your current asset to salary ratio. So in this scenario, if you earn $80,000, how much money do you need at age 40 to comfortably replace 40% of that in retirement? Well, at age 40, you need $77,000. Age 50, this is $181,000, or an asset to salary ratio of 2.3. Assets of 2.3 times your current salary. And it increases because you save more and your assets receive investment compounds. So now I can use this asset salary ratio to look at the differences between men and women and how their relative saving differs. So here is a graph of the asset salary ratio, grays for men, blues for women. And it goes up because you need more money as you age, right? And the dotted line is how much money you need at each age to replace 40% of your income. Now you can see men and women are on track. There's like no difference until about age 45. And then at age 45, something happens and men go up substantially compared to women. So men are able to replace about 10 to 15% more of their income by the time they retire compared to women. The silver lining here is that at least among our participants, women are still pretty well off being able to replace about 40% of their income, but it's still a lot less than men. This is my wrap-up page. Yeah. So that's a high-level overview of delving into some of the retirement income differences we find and some of the drivers. Some pressure points that you could think about policy to help this are childcare, elder care, kind of the glass ceiling and career advancement on one end. On the other end, greater financial literacy and education for participants, especially maximizing their workplace retirement plan. And that's all for me.
Okay, so next, I think rather than do, but Valerie, we're recording now.
Hello, my name is Valerie Martin Conley. I am so sorry that I was unable to join you in person today. I'm grateful to Ann Olin and to the conference planners for allowing me to participate virtually. I've always found this meeting insightful. I've presented at the annual conference several times over the years. I'm especially disappointed to miss the 50th anniversary. In addition to my current role as provost at Idaho State University, I'm also a TIAA Institute Fellow, which is how I met Ann. TIAA is truly guided by a set of core values aimed at serving those who do good in the world. It is absolutely time to take a hard look at the retirement income equity gap, and it is no surprise to see TIAA leading the way by highlighting this critically important issue for higher education. And it is also no surprise that the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education and the Professions is hosting this panel at the 50th anniversary conference. I hope this session will inspire participants to join the cause in identifying ways to reduce, if not eliminate, the retirement income equity gap and move the needle toward more positive change. To set the stage for our discussion, I will share some data from the Digest of Education Statistics and the Condition of Education, both publications produced by the National Center for Education Statistics. These data identify structural reasons that may be contributing to the retirement income equity gap in higher education. There are about 1.5 million faculty working in degree-granting post-secondary institutions in the U.S. While this number has steadily increased since 1970, more rapidly between the early 1990s and about 2010 or so, the most recent year of data shows a decline in the overall number of faculty nationwide, from 1,548,824 in 2019 to 1,489,415 in 2020. No doubt that COVID-19 has been a contributing factor. It will be interesting to see if this trend continues or if it is an anomaly. And of course, we know and understand that there's more to the story than the overall number. More of the growth in faculty positions has been in part-time positions, and though this chart does not show it, in non-tenure track or term-limited lower paying positions. In 1970, 78% of all faculty were full-time. In 1987, 2/3 of faculty were full-time. In 2011, the distribution of full-time and part-time faculty was 50-50. But get this, the number of part-time faculty was just a little bit higher than the number of full-time faculty. The number of part-time faculty was 762,355. The number of full-time faculty was 762,114. Since that time, it looks like the tide has turned. The percentage of part-time faculty has gone down, but we are a long way from the 2/3, 1/3 split or higher of the 1970s and 1980s. And there's a lot we don't know about the ability of part-time faculty to save for retirement. For example, their reasons for working part-time, whether they have other sources of income or full-time employment. But we do know that if part-time employment in higher education is their only employment, even if they are eligible to participate in the institution or state's retirement plan, their level of income does not provide a lot of opportunity for them to do so. These staffing patterns point to a structural reason why we may have some retirement income equity gaps in higher education. So what? Why should we care? Well, educators provide a public service to the nation. The College Board succinctly summarized the public benefits of higher education. Quote, "An educated population benefits society because college graduates strengthen our democracy and bolster our economy. Higher levels of education correspond to lower levels of unemployment and poverty. In addition to contributing more to tax revenues than others do, adults with higher levels of education are less likely to depend on social safety net programs, generating decreased demand on public budgets." End quote. Given the extent of higher education's benefits to society, what responsibility should higher education institutions and government, state and federal, take in ensuring that educators have access to employment that will enable them to accumulate wealth to live securely in retirement? The second chart shows the number of faculty by sex. Data by sex were not available prior to 1987, so that is where we pick up the trend line. Overall, the male-female distribution for faculty has reached parity. This is some good news for higher education. But wait, women are more likely than men to be employed part-time. More than half, 55% of women faculty, were employed part-time in fall 2020, compared to 45% of men. The fourth chart shows the number of faculty employed in 4-year and 2-year institutions, respectively. By far, more faculty work in 4-year institutions than in 2-year institutions. When thinking about the retirement income equity gap, this is again some good news for higher education, given that faculty salaries are generally higher in four-year institutions than in two-year institutions. But again, there's more to the story. In fact, the percentage of women employed part-time was higher than the percentage of men employed part-time in every control and level of institution. In private for-profit two-year institutions, nearly two-thirds, 64% of all part-time faculty were women. The 2022 Condition of Education provides a summary of the characteristics of all post-secondary faculty. From page 4 of that summary, average faculty salaries varied by sex. We know this. Unfortunately, the storyline has remained virtually unchanged since 2009, and there is evidence to suggest that it is getting worse. Quote, the average salary in constant 2020-21 dollars for all full-time instructional faculty at degree-granting post-secondary institutions was higher for males than for females in every academic year from 2009-10 to 2020-21. In 2020-2021, the average salary was $99,800 for males and $83,200 for females. In 2020-2021, the male-female salary gap ranged from $3,300 for instructors to $19,900 for professors. The male-female salary gap was 6% higher in 2020-2021 than in 2009-10 for professors, $19,900 versus $18,700, and 32% higher for assistant professors, $7,100 versus $5,400. In contrast, the gap was 23% lower for instructors, $3,300 versus $4,300, and 14% lower for lecturers, $5,200 versus $6,100 over the same period. The male-female salary gap for associate professors was essentially the same in both 2009-10 and 2020-21, $6,500 in both years, end quote. Taken together, these data, the overall number of faculty employed part-time, the number of women employed part-time, and the male-female salary gaps, suggest women are more likely to be employed in lower-paying, less secure positions than their male colleagues, contributing to a retirement income equity gap between men and women in higher education. Turning now to race ethnicity data, from page 3 of the Condition of Education summary, quote, considering full-time faculty only, in fall 2020, nearly 3/4 of faculty were white. Specifically, 39% were white males and 35% were white females. The next largest racial ethnic group was Asian Pacific Islander faculty. 7% were Asian Pacific Islander males and 5% were Asian Pacific Islander females. 4% of full-time faculty were Black females and 3% each were Black males, Hispanic males, and Hispanic females. American Indian, Alaska Native individuals, and individuals of 2 or more races each made up 1% or less of full-time faculty, end quote. Distributions of faculty by race, ethnicity, and employment status, race, ethnicity, employment status, and gender, and salary gaps were not provided in the summary. From available Digest of Education statistics tables online, I was able to calculate percentages of faculty by race, ethnicity, and employment status. There were 339,366 non-white faculty in fall 2020, excluding the race, ethnicity unknown, and non-resident alien categories. The percentage of white, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, and non-resident aliens employed full-time was higher than those employed part-time. A higher percentage of faculty reporting 2 or more races were employed full-time than part-time as well. Of all known race ethnicity categories, Black faculty was the only race ethnicity group more likely to be employed part-time than full-time. 55% part-time, 45% full-time. It is absolutely time to take a hard look at the retirement income equity gap and consider how staffing patterns in higher education may be contributing to the structural reasons for it. Thank you.
So I'm up. So, okay, great. So good afternoon to everyone here. And just by a show of hands, I'm going to make this a little interactive. How many people here are actually from the 5 boroughs? Okay, I see a good chunk of people. How many people here either took a subway here, a bus, or walked on a city street? All right, and just for a show of hands, how many people bought a coffee today or in your stay in New York City? So thank you, thank you, thank you, because you have contributed to the economy of this great city, and you've helped to fund the pension funds and to make sure that the city keeps moving in the right direction. So it's not something that we take for granted in the comptroller's office. It's something that I think is important to remind people when you think about retirement security. Your simple act of buying a coffee in the morning, whether you buy it from a truck or you buy it at a Starbucks, has contributed to the economy of the city. And the pensions are a very big piece of the city's budget if you were to parse it out. And it's a very important thing to keep in mind that that is contributing to the retirement security of the city and people that live in the city. Before I start, I just want to remind folks, if you ever go to Staten Island, if you ever want to pay the money to go over the Verrazano Bridge or take the ferry over and you go to Staten Island or you go to the southern part of Brooklyn, if you were to look at a map of New York City and where the workforce of the city resides, you'll see that those are the 2 largest areas on a map that have high concentrations of government workers. And that's important to us, that we know that money that people make while they're here and goes into their pension goes back into the neighborhoods when they retire and keep the city moving in a good direction. So I just want you to keep that in mind as I show you some of these slides about why this is so important to the city in general. So first and foremost, I want to say I work for the Comptroller of the City of New York, Brad Lander, who is, fortunately for me, has reappointed me to the pension funds and to be one of his representatives on the Deferred Compensation Board, along with my boss, Allison Hirsch, who wishes she could be here today, especially with Francis Perkins' connection upstairs. So the Comptroller of the City of New York, there are 5 retirement systems representing, as you heard when they introduced me, for teachers, regular employees, police, fire, and non-pedagogical employees of the Board of Education. So the Comptroller has 3 roles. We're the custodian of the funds by the city charter, so that means that somebody's got to mind the books, and that's our job. We're also the investment advisor, which is a job that is delegated to the Comptroller by each of the 5 retirement systems. And then we are also a trustee to the funds, which is the role that one of the roles that I occupy. And all of this is done through the Bureau of Asset Management with the best nickname in all of government, BAM. And we try to execute all of these functions on behalf of the taxpayers. So moving ahead, I think this slide is very powerful when you think about pensions and you think about retirement security. So as you can see, from 1983 to 2013, there has been a steep decline in defined benefit plans. And you see that by the time you get to 2013, and we all are familiar with someone that we know in our lives who works at a place that the pension fund that they could have been in is now closed off to them because they're a newer employee. So I would guess that number has even declined even more since 2013. That's why we care, because we know that we're in an industry that there's not a lot of pension plans left, and retirement security has shifted, and the burden has shifted onto members making contributions themselves. This brief snapshot of the city's workforce kind of tells you a lot, and all this information, our colleagues in government at the Department of Citywide Administrative Services produces a workforce report every year, which I find fascinating, and a lot of this information can be found there and some of this can be found on the controls website later on. So as you can see, the median age of a city employee is 43. What's so interesting about the city workforce in general is depending on the type of job that someone does, they could have a 20-year career and be fully retired and collecting their pension. Think about members of the uniformed service. Or you could be in a career where you start in your early 20s and go well into your 60s and even into your 70s and continue along and then collect your retirement into your 70s. We run the gamut. And that is an important thing to keep in mind, that a lot of the numbers that I share with you are skewed in the sense that we're dealing with a population, when we talk about retirees, some of which are 45 and some of which are 65 and some of which are 85. So for us to gather data is never as simple as it could theoretically be. So what's important here is this little bottom line that says eligible to retire in 5 years and eligible to retire in fiscal year 2020. So 16% of the city's workforce tomorrow could turn around and say, we're not coming back. Pay us our pension that we've earned, that we've contributed to. And I think that's a key point too, that members have contributed to. So the pension is not solely an employer contribution. It is also, in many cases, an employee contribution. Depending on what tier a member is in, they've either paid for a period of time and stopped paying. Those employees are a smaller and smaller percentage of the overall pension pool of retirees. It's more common for people to pay now until their retirement. But we're also contributing as city employees. So it's not a free ride. It's not a benefit. It's the deferred wages of the workforce. We're just going to get it later on. We're not going to get it while we're working. They're going to stretch that payment out. So if you think about it, we're also contributing too. So sometimes that's lost on people when they think that the benefit, when I show you the numbers, if you think it's too much, this is members contributing themselves too. So I think it's an important point to make. These numbers, though, do scare me. 16% of the city's population walking away this year. In the next 5 years, 12% of the city's population. There's institutional knowledge that can walk out the door. And this may not surprise a lot of people when you think about government. A lot of it is nuanced, because if you've been around and lived through a market cycle like this, or you lived through this type of environment, there is a lot of institutional value in that. And it's a shame when you think about situations where we're going to lose that, because sometimes we have events that only happen once every 10 years, and it's a smaller and smaller number of people that are there to actually be able to address it in the appropriate way without trial and error. So these are scary numbers. One of the best things, though, about the city, and it's not all about the pension, is we also offer a deferred compensation plan. So we're in that category on the first slide of people that offer both. So if members choose to contribute to the plan, they can do so. We like to tell people that when you retire from the city, you're going to get 3 benefits. You'll get your Social Security, you'll get your pension if you decide to join it, and if you decide to contribute money into the 457 or the 401k plan, you'll also get retirement security from 3 different pools of money. And we think that is really an important benefit. And fortunately for city employees, we're one of the few plans in the country that allows you to participate in both a 401k and a 457 at the same time, which is a unique benefit and something we don't take for granted. So as I was showing you, the retirement eligibility, the workforce of the city is almost 350,000 people. It's not a small. And these are full-time employees. If we added in the part-time employees, we'd be north of 400,000 folks that are employed by the city in various job functions. So these are real numbers. This is a real piece of the city. If you believe that the number is 9 million people that live in the city, this is a big chunk of folks. And I won't comment on whether or not the census undercounts or overcounts, but I think we can all agree that somewhere around 9 million is probably the right number. And we're talking about 350,000, almost 350,000 people that are employed by the city. Again, this just highlights the eligibility, the retirement eligibility. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. And I think you can all see that we have, interestingly enough, when we think about retirements, now, a majority of the city's workforce is female, but also a large chunk of our retirees are also female. So what's interesting about the trend is as women are leaving the workforce, they're being replaced in many ways by other women, which is a positive, I believe. And you can see that that trend has been going on for several years. 2015, there was a little bit of a even point, but we've continued this trend of having more and more female members of the workforce retire. And I think that that's interesting to keep in mind. When we hear about retirement security, we often, in the private sector, there's often this conundrum about, do women have access, do female employees have the same access as their male counterparts to retirement and their ability to participate? And we, as the city, have gone out of our way to kind of break that down and make sure that people can participate and that hopefully they will participate in retirement, join the pension plans, and also participate in the deferred compensation plan. And what we've done is, if you go to the deferred compensation website housed by the Office of Labor Relations, you'll see what's very interesting is a lot of clips that they have to market and explain to people as they enter the workforce why this is important to participate in these plans. And we have a whole section of videos that are geared towards female participants to encourage them to make sure that they join so that they close the retirement gap in their own homes. And we've really gone out of our way to make sure that we're transparent about that, and we encourage people to come, even if you don't participate in our plans, to come to our websites and see the things that we've put out there and maybe get some ideas for your own places. We really do try to make this a plan that's really for people and that people can access. And I think given the trend, that's why it's so important to us. So when we talk about the pension and when we talk about the deferred compensation plan, we have to just also keep in mind how much money we're talking about here. So held in the pension plans collectively is a little bit less than $250 billion held for the retirement security of current workers, past workers, and their beneficiaries. Hopefully all of this benefit goes back to members, stays within the city, and we can afford to give them pensions that will let them stay within the city's 5 boroughs and to live here for many years to come and perpetually contribute to the economy here so that these plans remain perpetual plans. Some of the things that you should know about the plan is, our average retiree, if I look across all 5 retirement systems, is a little older than 70. I think it's 70.89 years old is a typical employee of the city. That's across all 5 retirement systems. And we pay a benefit somewhere around $42,000 to each of those people and their beneficiaries. It doesn't sound like, it's not some of the numbers that you've seen in other professions, but when you think about it, if a median salary is somewhere in the $70,000 range and you're getting $42,000 from your pension, and then you've also contributed to your deferred compensation plan and get to take out some money from there, we hope that we've gotten you to that 80% goal, or at least given you the tools to get there yourself. And a lot of this is making sure that people know what is available to them and to make sure that people participate in the plan. It goes without saying, my colleagues in the Bureau of Asset Management always like me to remind people, we have an asset allocation that's very diverse. We're very diversified. I always get that question at these, where's the money? There's the money. That's where it's allocated. I encourage all of you to go to the Comptroller's website if you have questions about what we're actually investing in. I think that that's a very helpful yeah, that's a very helpful tool in understanding what benefits are being paid to city retirees. So the one thing I will leave you with here, when you think about some of the things that we've done as a city to kind of close the gap, is we do have a civil service system, which means people take tests. A majority of the city's workforce is in titles where they've taken a test. I think it's upwards of 80%. About 95% of the city's workforce are in labor unions. And why is that important? That means that if someone is a captain in the police department, or I should say a chief in the police department is probably the best example, whether they're male or female, they get paid the same as the person sitting in the office next to them or the cubicle next to them. In certain titles, you can collect overtime, but their base pay is not based on gender. It's based on whether or not they've passed the test and they can do the job. And we always try to find qualified people, but we make sure we have a level playing field and that people are treated fairly and equitably. And that is the thing that I think is the most important when I think about retirement security. Is we're trying to get people to retire with dignity. We want it to be equitable, we want it to be fair, and we want people to be able to access these great programs that we have in the city and to participate and do our part, not just because we're the city and we're here to help and the government, we're here to help, but we really think it's important that people have access to strong retirements, and that folks in retirement should be treated with dignity and not have to, worry about where the next meal's coming from. We want to make sure that they can have the tools and the access to things that can make their life better and quite frankly, their family and ultimately the city. So that kind of concludes my my remarks, but then I'll turn it over to Ann, and happy to answer any questions.
So before I pose a few questions, does anybody have questions or comments? Anything you want to raise? Very good point, and I know, Brent, you're probably thinking a lot of the same things I am, since we do a lot of work in this area.
Yeah, so you're right. We tend to see women take more conservative positions with the asset allocations. However, since the advent of the Pension Protection Act, which allowed qualified default investment alternatives to be the default investment for a plan, normally a target date fund, we're finding that those differences are becoming much less prominent. So, for example, participants in TIA over the last 10 years, 90% of them are using target date funds, and that's going to be the same for men and women. So
I should tell you, I'm 66. I'm retiring this year, so that my generation, Susie Orman and the Dave Ramsey generation.
that's right.
Congratulations on your retirement.
I will just say too, though, there's so much research that shows that women are also lacking in confidence in their own ability to manage their personal finances. So financial education, again, I will underscore that it's needed. It's needed at early ages. I mean, because until women feel more confident in their decision-making, they're not going to go into the appropriate risk-reward scenarios that they need to. So thank you for bringing that up.
You should also know that, compound interest is your, and if you start in your 20s.
Absolutely.
Loan, like I have friends who said, I can't afford it, and I said, can't afford not to.
Yeah. Same with an employer match. If your employer is going to make a match into your plan, you can't leave that money on the table. I mean, there are some just fundamental truths that we need to communicate.
Hi. Of some people I know, what you read casually, it seems like a lot of people manage their own equity gap by strategizing when they retire, which is a lot of times to move out of state or out of the country, and to find places where the tax base is lower, things like that. But that also sometimes means that they get less services because they're going to a place where they're, less infrastructure, less services all around. I wonder if you have any statistics on that and what the impact is, both in terms of the cities that are being left and also of those members who are trying to manage with limited, the limited options or resources.
Anybody?
I don't have any statistics. I mean, it's a fascinating question if you were to actually look into it. And I my understanding is that the infrastructure piece is what a lot of people don't think about when they move outside of metropolitan areas or have access to health insurance or to hospitals. And you know, the idea of going to a small community where there's only one physician that treats a whole community is very difficult when you have an aging population. So I think it'd be very interesting to look into that more.
Carting services, there may not be a whole bunch of clearing the road services, all that stuff.
Oh, my goodness, sorry.
I'll add on to that, that you mentioned moving for lower taxes. A lot of people, you know, may move to a state with lower income taxes, but then that state may have more consumption taxes, which tend to be regressive instead of a progressivity that most income taxes have. And I think there's a big gap in literacy around that too.
Anybody else?
Hi, so as the collective bargaining conference, I want to ask you about collective bargaining. So, first, what role can TIA play with the growing number of contingent faculty bargaining units in terms of developing plans for to deal with equity and et cetera regarding the part-time faculty? That's the first question in the private sector. In the public sector, we know that retirement is not negotiable. But I'm wondering from the public sector side, what role has labor played in working with the Comptroller's Office to deal with questions of racial and gender inequities in the retirement systems?
So I would say on the first point, where we can help maybe most readily, the TI Institute, is with data to inform policy positions. We've done a lot of studies to really get a better handle on what is the state of non-tenure track, how many are there, how many adjuncts, you know, by definition, how many are in each group, who is covered. There are many more adjuncts who do have access to retirement benefits than we thought. I think just last year, Paul may have done a study that really focused in on that question, because our assumption had been that most adjuncts do not have coverage or can't opt into their TIAA plan. We found that that's not the case, that many employers do allow adjuncts to participate in the TIAA plan. So I would say, at the very least, we can work with you on data and help you get a better understanding of the fact base. Anybody?
Yeah, I was gonna add, so we manage plan sponsors, right, participants' money. So I think a lot of it is getting the right information to plan sponsors. And while, as Ann said, contingent faculty may have access to a retirement plan, most often it's only a supplemental plan, and they may not have access to the primary DC plan, or they may not be eligible to receive employer contributions. So I think getting the facts correct and distributing to the plan sponsors can go a long way.
So, and I think to answer your question about what the public pensions can do, and what we do, what I would say very well in the Comptroller's Office, is we have a very strong corporate governance group that engages with public companies that we own. If you could imagine, with $250 billion of assets, we own a lot of companies. It's just the way of the world. If you invest in the Russell 3000, or you own 3,000 stocks, if you invest outside the U.S., there's thousands more. And we have a strong corporate governance group that exercises those rights, addresses issues of inequality with companies. As far as labor goes, we often hold companies' feet to the fire if we believe that they're violating the right of freedom of association. And we believe that there is an obligation with the money that we have to make sure that companies are doing the right thing. And if they're doing the right thing, they're going to be more profitable for the retirees and for the city, and those things are important to us. So I encourage all of you here, if you own a stock and you get something in the mail, to go vote a proxy. I encourage you to do so, and you should vote in the best interest of yourself, but we vote in the best interest of the pension funds.
I wanted to emphasize one other point. We heard a lot about different factors that contribute to the equity gap, the retirement income equity gap. And one that I think, Brent, you mentioned, but I want to underscore is caregiving. quoting Rosalind Carter, she says, there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And disproportionately, the role of caregiver, and I'm not talking about little kids, but more elderly parents, ailing spouses, disproportionately women bear the burden of caregiving. And so in addition to lower income and maybe time off the career path to take care of young children, this caregiving role is also a factor that affects how much you're able to save for retirement. 23 hours per week on average women spend in a caregiving role. 61% of the 48 million people who are caregivers are women. Caregivers typically reach into their own pockets to cover some of the expenses related to taking care of aging parents, whether it's for medications or groceries. That amount is roughly $7,000 per year, so out of pocket. That adds up. That's money that could be put into a retirement plan instead of going to take care of your parents, although we are all committed to doing that. And I think I just want to say, in that context, you know, employers need to be reminded by employees to look at their family and medical leave policies, make sure those are well enforced and well communicated. We did recently see a positive passage of legislation where Social Security will give credit for time spent as a caregiver toward Social Security, you know, covered work. But just wanted to add that to the mix of things that you should all be thinking about for your own sake, for those that work with you or for you. Yes.
I'm from California, so I'm CalSTRS and CalPERS and
Yes.
all those things. But I think that sometimes when faculty are new, and especially part-time, because we have the cash benefit, the CB, and then they have the defined benefit, and a lot of times the person in your HR office will put you in whatever in the best interest of the college. And so a lot of people that I talk to that are working part-time, and then they get to retirement, and they don't even know what program they're in, and a lot of them are in the cash balance, where the district only has to put a 4% in versus if they had to put it in the other one. And so then they find out they can't retire. And when I first started, I started going to the retirement meetings, and all these guys with the fur on their regalia were in there, and they would laugh at me and say, "Why are you here?" And then at the end, they told me, "Tell all your friends, your young friends, to come, because I just learned I'm going to die here." So I'm just saying that you have to understand, because if your district is putting you in something that's better for them, and that's where some of the inequity happens right there.
Which I think gets to Brent's point too. We have to work with plan sponsors to educate them and to make sure that they're educating their employees, and that can be through the unions. So we can all advance that.
It'd be fine if you're working full-time
Yeah,
someplace else.
but it's
and
not
like
best
get on
for,
the cake,
in all
yeah.
cases, yes. Anybody else?
Well, I'll just elaborate. Usually that,
We're at time.
you're right, that type of choice, it only happens once when you onboard, and it's irrevocable. So there's a lot happening when you onboard, and I think plan sponsors, some do a good job, some could do a better job at having their participants learn about the different types of plans. In the private sector, they don't really have that choice. It's almost always a defined contribution plan. And the other thing I wanted to add is, while TIA manages a lot of, we actually have a pretty big public sector as well. We manage the SUNY ORP in the state of Ohio, for example. But everyone else that's in our system has a plan option, but about 35% of the private sector workforce does not have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. And that means, and when you don't have access, only 8% of those save in an IRA. So if you don't have access, you're not saving for retirement. And there's a lot of people that fall systematically into this bucket that we also need to talk about.
We have time, but I'm sure everybody wouldn't mind breaking a little early.
I have one quick question.
Yes.
If you don't mind. So this is kind of a debate, and I represent higher ed faculty and professionals in New York State. So whose responsibility is it to fully inform a new employee of their options? And When the employer doesn't, what is the employee's recourse? We've run into situations where people weren't given an option and never enrolled. We've run into other situations where people weren't given an option and then were automatically enrolled in a system that they didn't choose. For the longest time, you know, the kind of word on the street was, if you don't elect within 30 days, they're going to put you in ERS, which is the state pension system. And then now suddenly that seems to have shifted. You have to make an affirmative election or else no election will be made for you. So whose responsibility is to fully inform the employee?
So I think I'll try this one. It is a great debate about whether or not auto enrollment should be done or not. I think what's very interesting is for a lot of, at least in the city, for a lot of the titles in the city, you're automatically enrolled. There are only a handful of systems that don't have auto enrollment. So we do have systems that don't have, the Board of Ed being the one that comes to mind in the city that doesn't have actual auto enrollment. And that has a lot to do with the fact that there's a lot of part-time employees. So there's always a question about the way that the state law is written. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to comment on the legislative history of why there's no auto enrollment. But it does beg the question on whether or not auto enrollment should be mandated. And I think from a worker's standpoint, and I've been a city worker for over 20 years, I had the option of not joining in. I was fortunate enough that I worked in a department that was very tied into the pension plans and was very aware of those. And I think that some of the onus is on the employee to know what's out there, but they should really be encouraged, in my opinion, by the HR or whatever the administration is to participate in these plans. Because it is really in the best interest of not just the member that I say that, but also the city. And when I think about when people retire, we want them to stay here. And look, I've made my career in retirement security, so I think it's very valuable. But it is a really interesting question on whether or not the member should be automatically enrolled, and I think there is some validity to having that debate. I think some of the difficulty that you find though is how to parse out the part-time employee versus the full-time employee. And I think that if I don't know the issue specifically, but I could imagine that has something to do with it, especially with the rise of adjuncts and lecturers, and if they go into the plan or don't go into the plan. I could just imagine from the outside looking in how complicated that is.
Within SUNY, we have the ORP, optional retirement plan, so then they can enroll in TIA and other providers. So it just adds complexity to it. That's just hard to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, if you're a city employee making over a certain amount of money, you actually have the option to join a voluntary contribution plan within the city, which is very similar to the ORP.
And I'll add from TIAA's perspective, we have to follow the rules set up by plan sponsors, which can vary substantially. If you go from SUNY to, say, the New Jersey system to, say, Cornell University, a private system, it can vary substantially in how the rules operate.
Yeah, I wish I had one clean answer, but the fiduciary responsibility differs by type of plan, public-private employee. It's complicated, and everyone's so afraid of the responsibility that no one, everybody likes to keep their head down a bit, but it's an important question.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck on handling that issue, and I don't envy you.
Yeah. Part of the job. Anybody else? Well, you guys get a break. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you the questions I had for you. I think we're going to call it a wrap. So thank you very much.
Thank you.